Hello, everyone. Welcome to Cracking Addiction. My name's Dr. Fergal Armstrong, and we have with us Jesse Ball. So, Jesse, we've spoken many times before about your experiences in recovery, and now you're at the point where you're actually a recovery support worker. One of the, I would argue, one of the essential processes within recovery is actually attending a peer support group. One of the peer support groups that you can attend is an AA meeting, the 12-step program. So tell us a little bit about, what the AA is and, how it works.
Yeah, so you've got AA, which is Alcoholics Anonymous, and then there's other variations of those groups like Narcotics Anonymous, Gamblers Anonymous, Sex Addicts Anonymous, Love Addicts, and
There's
so on
also
and so
Cannabis
forth.
Anonymous, isn't there? And there's
Yeah, I
Cannabis
think,
Anonymous, there's Methamphetamine Anonymous.
yeah.
Is there a
And
shopping Anonymous? There's a Food Anonymous, isn't there?
there probably is. If you can get addicted to it, there's probably a meeting on it. And essentially, these meetings all derive from Alcoholics Anonymous. And they've been around, AA originated over 100 years ago now. And these 12-step groups are based on the foundation that human willpower can't solve addiction. And I guess that comes down to this idea that we can't think our way out of a problem that created it with the same mind. So the 12-step goes through a 12-step program, which is a spiritual experience. So relying on a spiritual source as a way out of our dilemma, as opposed to our own thinking.
Right. Now, there's a number of people that I speak to who object to the concept of the 12 steps, and they don't feel that the 12 steps is for them. And there's a number of reasons why they don't feel it's for them. Often I hear that it's a cult. And what do you say to that? How would you defend the 12-step program AA from that charge of it being a cult? Because it requires a certain amount of indoctrination, doesn't it, into believing in God and giving yourself up to God, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. And first of all, I can see why people might think it's a cult. And I can understand why people don't like anything to do with a cult or that feeling, because, like, for me, I don't really like being told what to do. Um, and I think that, yeah, it is a massive deterrent for a lot of people initially. Um, yeah, so, yeah, first of all, I do empathize and understand that everyone has a different upbringing and life experiences. Like for me personally, it was quite, I wouldn't say easy, but in a sense it was. It was sort of easy to develop this spiritual connection because I already had one. I was brought up in a family which wasn't really religious. It was sort of neutral. So when it came to the option of either death, jails, or institutions, which is where my addiction was taking me, or I have to believe in something spiritual. It was a pretty easy decision by that point. But for someone, let's say, who grew up in a household with an abusive father who was really religious, you could see how they would tie abuse, fear, um, not feeling safe with religion. And for someone like that, it might be really hard to accept some form of spirituality into their life, and they might think that it's a cult and not want to partake. So I do understand why people might find it more difficult, but at the end of the day, and I don't want to sound like I'm not acknowledging or being insensitive, but at the end of the day, it's a life or death situation. It's either believe and get well, or don't believe and suffer.
I mean, when people talk to me about cults, there's two things that I think of that defines a cult. One is the centralization of resources, and two is the inability to leave. So if we think about the centralization of resources, these specifically the resources we're talking about are money and sex, because so the head honcho in a cult gets all the girls and all the money goes to him and he spends it on his big house that he lives in, and then all the other cult members live in the barn and they're all segregated, and as soon as young girls come of mature age, then they get to spend the night with the cult leader. I mean, that's a fairly common trope, I would say. um, does that happen in the 12 steps?
No, it doesn't. It's quite the opposite, actually. It's decentralized. So it's not like one group has all the power; it's all spread out evenly. Yeah, so it's quite the opposite to what you said, and you can leave whenever you want as well. There's no obligations.
Yeah.
There's no dues you got to pay. There's no pressure to attend. A certain meeting. You can freely come in and out as you please.
So every meeting is an independent entity. And if you're going to do a 12-step work, then you cannot actually charge for that. So you can't actually collect money for it. And certainly, I mean, I know, talk to us about this concept of 13th stepping, because a lot of people will criticize the 12 steps because of what they see as some rogue elements within the 12-step program,
Mm-hmm.
preying on the vulnerable, if you will.
Yeah, that's my understanding of 13 step. I always thought it was sleeping with someone after taking them through the 12 steps and, like you said, preying on someone vulnerable. Um, I guess in my recovery, it's just something I haven't really, I've kind of just left that over there. I'm just focused on myself and not really indulging in that sort of stuff. But at the end of the day, like, people go there because they're unwell. So, you do get people who are still unwell. Some people are getting healthier, and you need a sponsor in these fellowships as well. And a sponsor is anyone who is a little bit further ahead of you in the recovery program, and they can sort of lead you through. And the reason we need a sponsor in these recovery programs is because we can't trust our own thinking, and we need to be able to take direction from someone else who is sort of looking at our life circumstance objectively.
Well, that's a useful segue. You're saying that the sponsor is someone that actually is a protective influence within the 12 steps, who will actually keep you on the straight and narrow. How long do you have to be clean and sober to be a sponsor? Or another way of thinking about it is, when you're new to AA and you decide you want to sponsor, what are the criteria by which you judge someone before you ask them to be your sponsor?
Right. So the short answer is, for the first question you asked, usually about a year, but there's no hard and fast rule. Like, there doesn't have to be a set amount of time. I myself, it was suggested to me that I should choose a sponsor that I can understand and connect with. Some people say choose someone that you like, but then I heard someone say at a meeting once, well, it doesn't really matter if you like them or not. It has to be someone you understand, because there's no point choosing someone that you really like the way they dress and what they have, but you can't understand when they're explaining this 12-step program. The whole purpose of a sponsor is to take you through the 12 steps. And if you can't understand how someone explains it, because we all have our own ways of interpreting it, then it's not going to be helpful. So I'd say the most important criteria is choosing someone which makes sense to you when they speak. So often when people speak at meetings and other people will be listening, at the end of that meeting, they might say, could people put their hand up if they can be a sponsor? And that's when you look around, and if you've had someone at a meeting that you like, you can go and chat to them afterwards.
Right. So there's a couple of things to say about that. So you said that the role of the sponsor was to take you through the 12 steps, right?
Correct.
Now, that journey through the 12 steps, I would argue the perspective on it requires you to have actually done the 12 steps yourself, doesn't it?
Yes. Yeah.
So
Ideally,
is it
yes.
true to say that to be a sponsor, you need to have completed at least one round of the 12 steps for yourself?
Yeah. So that usually is the gold standard. But if say you're living out in a regional town and you're going to a meeting and there's only 4 people, and you need someone to you're desperate to work the first step, and the only person who's done the 12 steps in the meeting isn't there, and someone else has only done up to step 4, then in that case, it would be okay to ask that person who's done step 4 to take you through step 1. So, like, ideally, yes, to go through all 12 steps, that would be great to be a sponsor, but it doesn't have to be, as long as they've done more steps than you have.
Right. Okay. All right. So the next question then is, so, I've embraced my recovery. I'm going to go to a meeting. Why do I even need a sponsor? Surely just by attending the meetings, that's enough, isn't it?
Yeah, well, like I mentioned before, the whole idea is taking direction from someone else. And I guess this comes down to the principles of 12-step fellowships, which is about acceptance, willingness to try something new, and most importantly, that surrender. So giving up our old way of thinking and trying something new. And it's hard to sort of give up our old way of thinking and think something new. So a sponsor is that person in your life who will keep you accountable, but also introduce new ideas and concepts.
So really, the real magic of the 12-step program actually happens outside the meetings, And I wonder if the main function of an AA meeting is actually to introduce potential sponsors or potential sponsees within the framework of the work that they have to do.
Yeah, I'd make a strong argument that it is. Obviously, everything I'm saying today is just my opinion, but I definitely, for me, that's the most important part of the 12 steps meetings is actually doing the 12 steps himself with a sponsor.
Well, Jesse, thanks again for your expertise, but unfortunately we've run out of time today. I look forward to speaking with you again very soon, but thank you.
Thank you very much for having me.
And that's all for today, folks. My name is Dr. Fergal Armstrong, and this has been Cracking Addiction.